The wind was brutal that morning, the kind that makes your bones feel older than they are. I stood outside my father's house in rural Iowa, squinting through the frost-covered window, waiting for some sign of life. There wasn't any. The porch swing was still the curtains drawn. I knocked twice. Then again, nothing. I tried the door. Locked. That was odd. Dad always left it open when he knew I was coming, even if he liked to act like he didn't care. But this time I hadn't told him I was coming home. I wanted it to be a surprise. After 9 months working as a civilian military advisor in Germany, I figured I'd earned a few quiet days at home, maybe a hot coffee with him, like we used to do Sunday mornings. Something was wrong. My instincts didn't yell. They whispered. I stepped back and was about to call someone when Mrs. Eldridge, the neighbor, appeared from her front yard. "Tommy," she said. "You're back," I nodded, unsure whether to smile or worry. "Yeah, just flew in last night. Figured I'd surprise Dad." Her face fell instantly. "Oh, Tom, he's not here. He's at County Medical, ICU. Ambulance took him in a little over a week ago. I thought your son was with him." I froze. "Jake." "Yeah. I figured he'd told you. I saw on Facebook he was going to Bali or somewhere." I assumed it was all sorted. My throat tightened. Bali, big trip. "Looked expensive," she said gently. I stood there staring at the frozen driveway, the locked front door, and the horrible realization blooming in my chest. My son Jake had been listed as Dad's caregiver for months. I had trusted him, sent him money, let him handle things while I was away. And now my father was in the hospital, alone, on life support, and my son was on a beach. The cab that had just dropped me off was still reversing out of the cul-de-sac. I flagged him down again, climbed into the back seat with fists clenched and mind spiraling. "County General," I said. "Fast as you can." The driver nodded and hit the gas. The snow-covered roads blurred past, but all I could think about was what I'd find when I got there, and what I'd do if what I feared was true. My name is Thomas Greer. I'm 65 years old, though most days I don't feel it until my knees remind me. I served in the U.S. Army for over 20 years, retired as a logistics officer, then found myself pulled back in as a civilian contractor. Can't say no when the mission still needs doing. It wasn't about patriotism anymore, not in the flag-waving sense. It was about function, about duty, about being useful. I was never the loud type. I didn't make speeches or slap backs. I got things done, quietly, which probably explains a lot, like why my son Jake never understood me. I suppose that's the curse of men like me. We provide, protect, and remain misunderstood for the effort. Jake's 32 now, lives in Los Angeles, smart kid, sharp with tech, always had a vision of something bigger than the town we came from. I supported him, paid for college, helped with the down payment on his first place. When he said he wanted to run a startup, I said go for it. He said I was cold, but I thought I was being supportive. Maybe I never gave him the soft words he wanted. But I never failed him. Not once. Still, over the years, he started referring to me as the military ghost, always there in paperwork, never in the room. It hurt, but I didn't show it. That was the rule. My own father, Walter Greer, was a different breed. Born in the 1930s, a Navy vet, stubborn as a nail. He raised me with one guiding principle: handle your business. When Mom died, he barely flinched. But every morning he still brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for him, one for her. Said it helped the silence sit better. I moved away after high school like most kids, but we kept in touch. As he aged, I offered to move him closer. He refused. Said Iowa was his soil, and he wasn't dying somewhere he didn't recognize. Fair enough. A few years back, after his 3rd hospital visit, I sat Jake down, told him it was time to step up. I'd be in and out with work, and Grandpa needed someone nearby. Jake agreed, said he'd handle it. I trusted him. I even set up monthly transfers, just enough to cover food meds, the occasional repair. I asked for receipts. He said, "Don't worry about it, Dad. I got this." And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Maybe because it was easier than checking. Maybe because I was tired of always being the one who checked. But deep down, I think I knew. Jake was a dreamer. He never had a stomach for the ugly parts of real-life hospital visits, bedpans, overdue prescriptions. That was too mundane for someone building something epic, as he called it. And yet I clung to the hope that blood meant something, that family would come through when it mattered. I didn't raise him to be selfish, at least I didn't think I had. But standing outside that locked house hearing about Bali and ICU in the same breath, I felt something old and bitter rise in me. It wasn't just disappointment. It was betrayal, wrapped in guilt. I'd spent my life keeping others safe, solving problems before they became visible. But this one had slipped past me. My father, the man who taught me how to be strong, was lying in a hospital bed without anyone by his side. And I had sent money, faith, and my name to a son who apparently thought my ties were more important than medicine. That was my family, a father too proud to call for help, a son too distracted to see what was happening, and me, somewhere in the middle, the invisible thread, trying to hold a legacy together. I didn't know what I would find at County General, but I knew this something was broken, and I was done hoping it would fix itself. The hospital was quiet in that artificial way. Places of life and death tend to be. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that sterile blue-white glow that makes people look older, sadder. I walked through the automatic doors, barely registering the signs, or the Christmas decorations half-heartedly strung across the waiting area. It was early December, but it could have been July for all I noticed. The receptionist glanced up, her expression professional but tired. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Walter Greer," I said. "He was brought in about a week ago, ICU, I think." She typed for a moment, then frowned slightly. "Yes, he's here. Room 712. But she looked up. "Are you family?" "I'm his son." She hesitated, then handed me a visitor badge. "He's in critical condition, sedated. No major changes in the last 2 days." I nodded. "Has anyone visited?" She looked back at the screen, then shook her head. "No visitors on file." I stood there for a moment, staring at her like I'd misheard. None," she repeated gently. "You're the first." I thanked her and walked toward the elevator, my heart a heavy weight dragging against my ribs. Each step felt like a slow fall. The hallway to ICU was lined with muted artwork and chairs that no one ever sat in, unless they were desperate. I passed nurses, doctors, families with vacant eyes. Room 712 was at the end. I paused at the door, my hand hovered over the handle. Then I opened it. The beep of machines hit me first, rhythmic, cold. My father lay on the bed, smaller than I remembered. Tubes in his arms, oxygen mask over his face, wires like spider legs crisscrossing his chest. His eyes were closed, but his expression was one of someone who'd been fighting a war without reinforcements. He looked abandoned. I stepped in slowly, sat beside him, and took in the details. The whiteboard on the wall had the date written in green marker. Next to it, the phrase, "Still no visitors." I swallowed hard. There was a chair in the corner, pushed back like someone had meant to use it, but never did. I leaned forward and took his hand. It was warm, but limp. The strength I remembered, the grip that once helped me up after falling off a bike, was gone. I spoke soft at first. "Hey, Dad. It's Tom. I'm here now." He didn't move, didn't twitch, just the steady hum of the ventilator answering for him. I sat there for a long time, staring at the man who had once taught me to sharpen knives and mow in straight lines. I thought about the last call I had with Jake. 2 weeks ago. He told me everything was fine. Said Grandpa was holding steady. No mention of hospitals. No urgency. I pulled out my phone and opened Jake's Instagram. There it was. Pictures of cocktails, beaches, boat rides. Hashtags like hatched, blessed, and hashtag healing vibes. The date, 4 days after Dad was admitted. I nearly crushed the phone in my hand. That's when the nurse entered. Mid-30s, exhausted. She looked at me and smiled gently. You must be Mir Greer's son. Yes, Thomas. I'm Claire, she said. I've been taking care of him since he arrived. Stable, but we're watching the kidneys closely. It's been touch and go, I nodded. Has anyone checked in, Jake? No, she said, her voice carefully neutral. We called the emergency contact listed. No response, no one's come. Honestly, we weren't sure anyone would. That sentence punched harder than any fist. I didn't respond. Just kept my hand on his and stared at the wall. Claire placed a hand on my shoulder. He's not alone anymore. I nodded, still silent. After she left, I sat there and let the anger settle. Not rage. Rage is fast, explosive. This was deeper. This was betrayal brewed slowly over years. Jake had every opportunity. I gave him support, trust, responsibility, and he'd failed. Worse, he hadn't even cared enough to pretend. I stood and paced the room, opened the drawer beside the bed and found a cheap comb. I gently brushed Dad's hair the way he used to brush mine before school when Mom was sick. I thought about the old man telling me dignity matters most when no one's looking. And here he was being watched by strangers while his own blood toasted sunsets in Bali. I looked up at the monitor. His heart rate was steady. But he deserved more than steady. He deserved respect. He deserved presence. He deserved to not be a forgotten man in a cold room. I sat back down, pulled out my notebook, and began writing down everything: dates, conversations, transfers, the names of every nurse who'd spoken to me. Not because I was preparing for war, but because I'd fought too many wars to ignore injustice when I saw it. And this, what they had done to him, what Jake had allowed, was injustice in its quietest, cruelest form. That night, I didn't leave the hospital. I stayed in the chair next to my father's bed, watching the rise and fall of his chest, as if memorizing it could bring him back. Around 2 a.m., I opened my banking app and started digging. I had access to the shared account set up for Grandpa's expenses, the one I'd been transferring money into each month for Jake to manage his care. The last deposit I made was 6 weeks ago, $2,000. The description was clear: for Dad's medical support. I scrolled through the outgoing charges. Not a single payment to a pharmacy, no grocery store, no hospital transaction, just a string of luxury charges, hotel bookings, flight confirmations, even a spa day. Jake had used that money to fund his vacation. The realization hit with a sickening thud. This wasn't neglect. It was theft, dressed up in hashtags and beach photos. I screenshotted everything, backed it up on a private cloud, then began building a spreadsheet. Dates, amounts, vendors. I labeled the document Evidence Jake G and saved it 3 different ways. I wasn't just reacting, I was documenting. The next morning, I called a lawyer I knew from my days in Logistics Command. Retired now, but sharp as ever. You're going to want paper, he said, and a signed POA if you want to take action quickly. Already on it, I told him. I'll have it to you by noon. After the call, I drove to my father's house. It felt like walking into a ghost's memory. The coffee mug still in the sink. The recliner pointed at the same TV he'd watched for years. I opened his filing cabinet and found the envelope labeled legal. Inside there, it was a notarized power of attorney dated just 3 months prior. He'd named me as sole agent for all medical and financial decisions replacing Jake. He hadn't told me, hadn't wanted to burden me. That was just like him. There was also a letter, handwritten shaky, but unmistakably his. Tom, if you're reading this, something went wrong. I knew it might. I didn't want to believe Jake wouldn't show up, but I couldn't risk it. You always took responsibility, even when it wasn't fair. I trust you. Don't let them talk you out of what needs to be done. I held the letter for a long time, the words carving something permanent into my chest. This wasn't just about hospital bills anymore. It was about my father knowing who would stand when things fell apart. And it wasn't Jake. Back at the hospital, I handed the nurse a copy of the new POA. She updated the chart without question. I made 3 more copies, one for the lawyer, one for the bank, one for the estate manager. That afternoon, I called the bank and froze the account. every card tied to it, every transaction monitored. Jake would find out soon enough, and when he did, I'd be ready. Because this wasn't just family drama anymore. This was accountability. Real, legal, unapologetic. I had spent my life being called a hard man, cold, distant. But I had always been fair, and always showed up. And now I was going to make sure that counted for something. Starting now. 3 days passed before Jake noticed. The first sign was a missed call, then another, then a barrage of texts, all variations of confusion dressed as outrage. "Hey Dad, weird issue with my card. Can you check the account, then?" "Okay, now I'm locked out. What's going on?" And finally, "Are you serious right now? I'm in another country." I didn't answer any of them, not yet. I needed one more thing before I confronted him. It came in the form of a phone call from Claire the nurse. "Mr. Greer, we found something when we were cleaning your father's bedside drawer. Thought you'd want it." I drove over and she handed me a weathered manila envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable. "For Thomas only, if he returns." My hands shook a little as I opened it. Inside was a second letter, shorter than the last. "Tom, if this is in your hands, then I trust you saw the truth for yourself. I didn't want to poison you against your own son. That's not what fathers do. But I needed you to witness it, not to hurt you, but to make sure you never doubt again who stood where when it counted. Let what you saw speak louder than what you hoped." I stared at the paper, heart pounding. Dad had known. Maybe not the extent, maybe not every lie, but he'd seen the shape of it, the absence, the silence, and he'd made a plan. Quietly, like he always did. Just like me. The next morning, I called Jake. He answered immediately, the sound of waves crashing faintly in the background. "Dad, thank God. My cards aren't working, and the hotel is demanding." "Stop," I said. "Listen." "Not talk." He went silent. "Grandpa's in ICU. Has been for over a week. You were listed as his emergency contact. You didn't respond, you didn't visit, and you used the money I sent for his care to fund a vacation." He started to protest, but I cut him off. "I have the statements. I have the timeline. I have the medical reports and a copy of the POA that names me as his agent. You are done. Legally, financially, and otherwise." "You're overreacting," he said, tone suddenly defensive. "You don't know what I've been dealing with." "No," I replied, "but I know what Grandpa's been dealing with, alone, while you played victim in paradise." "This is insane," he snapped. "You're acting like a dictator." I almost laughed. Funny, coming from someone who's lived off my support since he was 20. You had one job, show up, and you failed. So what? You're cutting me off, not just cutting you off, I said. I'm correcting the mistake of thinking blood guarantees loyalty. I hung up before he could answer. Then I took a deep breath and stood outside the hospital, staring at the cloudy sky. My father had trusted me. And now with every decision I made, I was proving him right. The next step wasn't about emotion. It was about execution. I called Mirvan, the attorney I'd worked with during my contracting years. He still had an office in Des Moines and still answered his phone like he was expecting a mission brief. I'm activating a durable power of attorney, I told him. Need full lockdown on my father's assets, immediate authority over medical decisions, and legal documentation to block any interference from unauthorized family members. He didn't ask for context. He just said, "Come in with the paperwork. We'll move." I drove straight from the hospital. In his office, I handed him the POA, the letter from my father, and the spreadsheet I'd built with every financial inconsistency from the past 6 months. He was sending Jake money, I said. Regularly, every transfer marked for care expenses. Not $1 went toward medicine or groceries. It funded a vacation. Vaughn flipped through the documents. How much total? Over 12 grand since summer. Not including the cash Jake withdrew directly from Dad's account. Vaughn nodded slowly. We can build a case for financial abuse. Elder neglect. You have the paper trail. We'll freeze the accounts today. File emergency guardianship if needed. You have full POA, so that gives us leverage. I'm not after a lawsuit, I said, not yet. I want protection. I want my father's name cleared and his care uninterrupted. You'll get it, he said. But understand, once we file, they'll know. Jake. Any other relatives tied to the accounts. You're drawing a line. Good, I said. Let them see it. We filed the documents that afternoon. The bank was notified. The hospital updated their files. From that moment, I was listed as the sole point of contact for everything related to Walter Greer. Medically, legally, financially. I expected resistance. I expected phone calls. I wasn't disappointed. Jake tried first, then his lawyer. Then my ex-wife, who had been out of the picture for years, but apparently still felt entitled to input when her vacation fund dried up. I ignored them all. Vaughn drafted a cease and desist warning them that any further attempts to access Walter's records or finances would result in formal restraining orders. The message was clear. You had your chance. You failed. Stay out. Then came the meeting that changed everything. The hospital social worker reached out, said there'd been a visitor inquiry that seemed odd, someone claiming to be an advisor for Jake. They'd been asking about Walter's estate, fishing. I went straight to the hospital, showed them the POA again, made sure access was restricted. Then as I was leaving, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, General Carlton. Retired now, but still sharp as steel. He'd been my commanding officer during my last deployment. Tom, he said, clapping my shoulder. Heard you were back. Noticed your name on a few files while consulting. I told him everything, not in detail, just enough. My father, the ICU, the silence, the betrayal. He listened, said nothing for a long moment. Then quietly he asked, "What room is he in, 712? He nodded. "Let's pay our respects." We walked together through the sterile halls. When we entered the room, my father didn't stir. But General Carlton stood at the foot of the bed, straightened his back, and gave a full, deliberate salute. Not rushed, not symbolic. A real one. Then he turned to me and said, "This is what it means to show up. What you're doing, quiet, thankless, hard. It's the definition of honor. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I didn't speak. I couldn't. But something shifted in that moment. For years I'd lived under the label of absentee, of cold father. Now standing in that room with a salute fresh in the air, I felt seen. Not by the world, by something truer. I returned to the legal process with renewed clarity. Vaughn helped me initiate a forensic audit on the accounts tied to Jake. We submitted a motion to probate court to secure full estate oversight, blocking Jake and anyone else from future claims. We also filed for retroactive restitution, reclaiming any funds misused under false pretenses. The judge reviewed our petition, the documents, the pattern of transfers, and signed the emergency order within 48 hours. Jake was officially removed from all legal standing regarding Walter Greer's affairs. I received an email from his attorney filled with passive-aggressive language about disagreements in perception and temporary misunderstandings. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Vaughn, who laughed and said, "They're panicking. Let them." I knew they'd try to spin it. They'd say I was vengeful, controlling, out of touch, that I was overstepping. But they didn't know what it meant to sit by a man's bedside for nights on end, combing his hair and whispering updates into the silence. They hadn't earned the right to speak. I had. 2 days after the court order was signed, I received an official notification from the hospital administrator. It was brief and formal, confirming what I already knew. All medical decisions would go through me. All inquiries would be denied unless I personally authorized them. It was done. The legal framework was airtight, but closure wasn't legal. It was emotional. That's when I returned to the hospital for something I hadn't planned. Not a signature, not a form. Something smaller, something louder. I walked into room 712 just after sunrise. My father was still unconscious, his chest rising and falling with the machine's rhythm. His skin looked thin, translucent, like old parchment. I pulled a small box from my coat pocket. Inside was his navy pin, the one he'd kept locked in the drawer for years. He'd earned it in Korea, lost friends in the war, and refused to ever wear it outside a funeral. Said it was for remembrance, not show. I pinned it gently to his hospital gown. "Someone needs to remember, old man," I whispered. Then I stepped back and stood at attention. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my hand, and saluted. Not quick, not ceremonial. The kind of salute we gave in the field, when lives depended on respect. It wasn't for the nurses, wasn't for the cameras. It was for him, for the man who raised me in silence but taught me everything by example. He didn't open his eyes, didn't move. But something shifted in me. The silence of that salute echoed louder than any courtroom gavel. That afternoon, Jake called again. His voice was calmer, almost performative. "Dad," he said, "look, maybe we both overreacted. I was stressed. Things got out of hand. Can we just talk?" I didn't say anything. He kept going. "I didn't know Grandpa was that bad off. You know how he downplays things. I thought he was stable." "He coded 2 nights ago," I said flatly. "They had to resuscitate him." Silence. Then I didn't know. "Because you didn't ask," I said. "Because you were too busy taking pictures with pineapples." "You don't have to be cruel," he muttered. I exhaled. "Jake, I'm not being cruel. I'm being factual. You want grace. I want accountability. We don't want the same things," he tried to plead. "I'll come back. We can talk this out." "No," I said. "You can stay where you are. The estate is locked. Your access is revoked. The hospital knows your name and they've been instructed to direct all calls to me. You had a chance. You made your choice. You're acting like I'm the enemy. You're not the enemy," I said. "You're just not the hero you think you are. And until you're willing to be honest about that, you don't belong in this story." I ended the call. No shouting, no drama, just a line drawn with absolute clarity. That night I returned to the hospital with a thermos of coffee and sat beside my father. I told him everything. About the court, the calls, the salute. I don't know if he heard me, but I like to believe he did. Because halfway through my ramble, the heart monitor gave a soft, irregular blip, like a man sighing in his sleep. Maybe it was reflex. Maybe it was recognition. Either way, it felt like something passed between us. An unspoken message, something like, "I see you now, and thank you." In the weeks that followed, I settled into a new rhythm. Wake early. Bring coffee for the nurses, sit by my father's side until dusk. I'd read to him sometimes old letters, newspaper articles, his favorite detective novels. Other times, I just talked. Not about the pain, not about Jake, about the past, about the things we never said out loud when he was well. I told him I forgave him for being silent in his love. I told him I understood now that love wasn't always soft. Sometimes it was a roof, paid for a car fixed without asking a call returned at midnight. The kind of love I'd offered Jake. The kind of love I thought he'd return. But he hadn't. And now I was finished hoping he might. I focused instead on what I could do with what remained. My father's estate wasn't massive, but it was stable. A modest home, a pension, a few savings bonds. I spoke to Vaughn again, this time with a different mission. "I want to start a fund," I told him. "Something for elderly veterans, ones who don't have family, or worse, ones who do but have been left behind anyway." "You're serious?" he asked. "Dead serious. Call it the Walter Fund. Emergency aid, legal protection, care support. No red tape, just dignity." Vaughn nodded slowly. "We can make that happen." We got to work. I poured the estate into a nonprofit trust, filed the documents, created a small board of advisors, people I trusted, people who had seen abandonment firsthand. I didn't go public. Didn't seek media. Just quietly began helping. The first case was a Vietnam vet named Charles. He'd been evicted after his daughter forgot to pay the mortgage despite receiving support money from the VA. We stepped in, got him into temporary housing, paid his back rent, made sure his benefits were redirected. He cried when we handed him a new key, said no one had cared in years. I told him, someone does now. Every success felt like reclaiming something, not just for me, for my father, for every forgotten man I'd seen in hospitals over the years. I still checked my phone occasionally. Jake sent a few more messages, all variations of apology, guilt, confusion. I archived them without reply. Not out of spite, but because this wasn't about him anymore. This was about doing something with the wreckage, not covering it up, turning it into something useful, something good. The anger didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It became action, and action finally felt like peace. The morning my father passed, there were no alarms, no frantic nurses, just a quiet stillness that settled over the room like the first snow. I had dozed off in the chair, a thin hospital blanket draped across my legs. When I woke, the machines were silent. The rhythmic beep that had been my soundtrack for weeks was gone. I reached for his hand. It was warm but no longer living. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just sat there letting the silence say what words never could. The nurse came in, gently paused, and nodded. He went peacefully, she said. You were here. That last part mattered. He wasn't alone. Not at the end. I made sure of that. The funeral was simple. Military honors. A few close friends. No fanfare. No Jake. He sent flowers. Cheap ones. I had them redirected to the hospice ward. My father had always said, don't waste good money on dead gestures. I honored that. At the service, I stood in full uniform. I spoke not of our disagreements, not of the years spent apart, but of what he gave me by example: discipline, strength, the quiet courage to stand in the fire without needing applause. I said goodbye with a firm salute and a promise whispered under my breath: I will carry it forward. Back home, I cleaned the house, donated what could be used, packed away what was too sacred to give. In the attic, I found a box labeled Tom, in case. Inside were newspaper clippings, report cards, a photo of me in basic training with the words written on the back in his scrawl: my son, my pride. He doesn't say much, but he does what's right. I stood there holding that photo and finally let the tears fall. Not from grief alone, from recognition, from finally seeing in black ink and yellowed paper that I had been understood all along. Jake tried again to reach out, sent an email titled Rebuilding. I didn't open it. I archived it with the others. Maybe one day I'd read them. Maybe not. The Walter Fund grew, quietly. We helped 6 more veterans in the first 3 months, rented a van for medical transport, paid off overdue heating bills, gave someone's grandfather a proper burial. No headlines, no social media, just dignity. That was enough. One afternoon, a young woman from the VA called. She'd heard about what we were doing, asked if we had a mission statement. I thought for a long time before answering. Then I said, we show up. That's it. That's what we do. She said it was perfect. She was right. I still visit the cemetery on Sundays, sit by the grave. Sometimes I bring coffee, sometimes I bring silence. But I always bring presence. And that I've learned is the one thing you can give that no one can fake. Not in Bali, not with hashtags, only here, where it counts. The days after the funeral came with a strange kind of quiet. Not peace exactly. Just a space where the noise used to be. I stopped waking up in panic. The beeping machines were no longer in my ears. I walked through the house without waiting for a phone call or a new emergency. Things were still, but not empty. In the kitchen, the coffee maker clicked on automatically at 7, just like he'd set it. I left it that way. The scent reminded me of the mornings we never said much but always shared that first cup. I'd sit at the table, scan the headlines, and look out the window. It wasn't about news. It was about grounding, about knowing exactly where you were when everything else tried to pull you away. I spent more time on the Walter Fund, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because when you've seen what it means to be forgotten, you can't unsee it. We took on a case in Montana. A Korean War vet named Ernest, 88 years old, trying to get to dialysis 3 towns over. No family, no working vehicle. His neighbor used to drive him, but she moved. Within a week, we had a volunteer scheduled and funds wired to cover transport for 6 months. When I called to check in, he said I didn't think anyone cared. I told him, someone does now. It became a script. But it was always true. The stories came in slowly at first. Then they multiplied. Messages from nurses, from old friends, from strangers who had watched their parents fade alone. They didn't ask for pity. They just wanted someone to say, "You're not imagining this." I answered everyone, sometimes with resources, sometimes just with presence. Jake never showed up, never came back, but he posted something online, a vague quote about family betrayal and healing through distance. Someone sent me a screenshot. I didn't care. I wasn't bitter. I was resolved. You don't have to win every argument. You just have to live with clarity. That was what my father taught me, not with lectures, with action, with constancy. He never asked to be honored, but he deserved it. So I honored him the way I knew how, by showing up, by not making excuses, by turning the pain into something that could not be erased by time or denial. That's the kind of revenge I believe in. The quiet kind, the kind that doesn't shout in courtrooms or slam doors, the kind that builds something permanent, one act of dignity at a time. And now when I walk through that house, the one he built with bare hands, the one he aged inside until he couldn't anymore, I don't feel grief. I feel weight. The weight of legacy. The kind you don't run from. The kind you carry forward. Because if you've ever stood in a cold hospital room holding the hand of someone who gave you everything and realized you were the only one who came back, you know exactly what matters. And you know it's never too late to show up.